Captain Ethan Cross stood in front of the old, cracked window, staring out at the remnants of Earth. The city below, once filled with life and energy, was now nothing more than a decaying ruin. The air was thick with smoke, and the distant sounds of distant explosions echoed through the streets. Ethan's face was worn and tired, his eyes reflecting the weight of the war he had been fighting for years. His body was covered in scars, each one telling a story of a battle fought and survived. He had seen more than most soldiers, endured pain that many couldn't even imagine. The wounds on his skin were reminders of the countless lives lost and the countless more to come. He had survived, yes, but at what cost? The war with the alien forces had begun decades ago. At first, humanity had fought with everything it had, but over time, resources dwindled and the human race was pushed further back. The invaders, called the Solarith, were ruthless, their technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. They tore through cities, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. Earth, once a thriving home, had been reduced to a battleground. Ethan had been a part of the earliest resistance efforts. He had been there from the beginning, fighting alongside soldiers who had all become family in the worst possible way. They had all shared the same vision, to protect Earth and its people. But now, it felt like the war was nothing more than an endless struggle, with no end in sight. He ran his fingers over the jagged scar that ran down his cheek, a deep mark that reminded him of the time he had almost lost his life on a mission. His hand trembled slightly, a sign of the weariness that had been creeping up on him in recent months. It wasn't the first time he had felt this way, but this time it was different. The war had taken a toll on him, not just physically, but mentally. Despite the constant battles, there had been moments of hope. There were victories, small ones, but victories nonetheless. The Resistance had managed to hold on to certain parts of the world, keeping the Solarith at bay. But now, the Solarith were preparing for their final strike. A weapon so powerful, it could destroy everything humanity had left. Ethan knew he had to fight. He had no choice. His duty was clear, and he was ready to do whatever it took to protect Earth, even if it meant sacrificing himself. He had done it before, and he would do it again. But this time, something inside him was different. The weight of it all was heavier than ever. He heard a knock on the door. Without turning around, he called out, "Come in!" The door creaked open, and a young soldier stepped inside. Her name was Mira Vance, a medic turned soldier. She was young, but there was an intensity in her eyes that spoke of wisdom beyond her years. She had been with the Resistance for some time now, and despite the horrors she had witnessed, she remained steadfast. Mira had seen Ethan in the heat of battle, had helped him through some of his darkest moments. She knew the toll the war had taken on him, just as she knew the weight of the scars that covered his body. Yet, unlike others, Mira didn't see Ethan as a broken man. She saw something else. A warrior who had endured, who had lived to tell the tale. "Captain," she said softly, her voice carrying a sense of urgency. "They're asking for you in the command room." "The council is ready to discuss the next phase of the operation." Ethan didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the city below. The Solarith were close, too close. They had nearly wiped out all of humanity's military forces, and the last bastion of defense rested on their shoulders. "I'll be there in a moment," he said quietly. Mira stepped closer, her eyes scanning his face. She had seen the haunted look in his eyes before, but today it seemed worse than usual. She could sense the doubt, the fear he was hiding. She knew he was struggling, but there was nothing she could say to make it better. She had tried before, but nothing seemed to reach him.
"Ethan,"
she began gently.
"You're not alone in this."
Ethan finally turned to face her. His eyes were weary, but there was a flicker of something in them. Something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. "Hope." "I know," he replied, his voice hoarse.
But sometimes it feels like it doesn't matter. No matter how hard we fight, we can't seem to win.
And every victory feels like it costs more than we can afford. Mira nodded, understanding the pain in his words. She had seen the cost of war. She had seen what it did to people, to soldiers like Ethan. But she also knew something else. She knew that the scars he carried weren't just marks of pain. They were signs of survival. They were victories. Even if he didn't see them that way. "You've survived," she said firmly. "And that means something. You're still standing. Still fighting. That's victory." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then sighed deeply. "I'm not sure how much longer I can keep doing this, Mira. I'm tired. Tired of the constant battle. Tired of the death, the destruction." "I know," she said quietly. "But you're not just fighting for survival anymore. You're fighting for something bigger. You're fighting for the future. And that's worth every scar." Her words lingered in the air, but Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. There were too many thoughts swirling in his mind, too many feelings he couldn't put into words. But Mira was right about one thing. He had survived. He had been through hell and back, and somehow he was still standing. He turned away from her and walked toward the door, his mind already shifting to the next mission, the next fight. There was no time for doubt, no time for weakness. Earth was counting on him. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady once more. "We have a fight to win." Mira followed him without hesitation, her gaze lingering on him for a moment longer. She knew he was broken, but she also knew he wasn't beyond saving. And for as long as she had breath in her lungs, she would keep fighting alongside him, because humanity needed soldiers like Ethan Cross. They needed people who, despite the scars, still believed in the possibility of victory. As they walked down the hallway toward the command center, Ethan felt the weight of his scars in a way he hadn't before. But he also felt something else, something faint but growing. It was a spark, a flicker of hope that he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Maybe Mira was right. Maybe his scars weren't just signs of pain. Maybe they were victories, after all. The days after the battle had blurred together. The air felt heavier, as though the weight of the world was constantly pressing down on Ethan's shoulders. His body was battered, and his soul felt no lighter. Yet, in the midst of the destruction, there was one thing that gave him a glimmer of hope: Mira Vance. Mira, with her quiet strength and unwavering dedication, had become more than just a medic to Ethan. She had become a steady presence in his life, someone who saw beyond the soldier's face. She saw the man, the scars, the weariness, the doubts, and still, she stayed. She didn't judge him for the darkness that had crept into his soul, and she didn't shy away from the harsh reality that war had etched into his heart. Ethan found himself drawn to her presence more and more, though he didn't understand why. She wasn't like the others, cold, distant, and detached from the emotions that clouded his judgment. Mira had faced the same horrors, yet she had something that the others lacked. Hope. It was that hope that kept her going, that kept her fighting. And somehow, it was beginning to infect Ethan as well. He had always prided himself on being a man of action. He wasn't one for words, never had been. But with Mira, he found himself wanting to open up, to share his burdens with someone who wouldn't dismiss them. He had been carrying the weight of the war alone for so long, never allowing himself to lean on anyone. But Mira wasn't just anyone. She had seen his scars, and instead of recoiling in fear or disgust, she had called them victories. The thought lingered in his mind as he lay in his cot, staring at the ceiling of the makeshift medical ward. The pain in his body had become so familiar that it almost didn't register anymore. He had taken countless injuries in the line of duty, and each one had left its mark. His arms, once strong and unyielding, now bore deep gashes from battles past. His legs had carried him through countless conflicts, but they were no longer as steady as they once were. But it wasn't just the physical scars that haunted him. The emotional scars were far deeper. There were memories that he couldn't escape, faces of comrades lost in battle, the sound of their screams ringing in his ears every night. He could never forget those moments, those faces. They lived with him, haunted him, reminding him of all that had been lost. Mira had noticed the way his eyes would cloud over, how his shoulders would stiffen when certain topics came up. He couldn't hide his pain. Not from her. She could see it in the way he moved, in the way his body tensed, as if bracing for the next blow. She had been there long enough to know the signs. One evening, after a long day of dealing with injured soldiers, Mira found herself sitting beside Ethan in the quiet of the barracks. She hadn't said much in the last hour, but her presence was enough. She didn't need to speak to make him feel understood. They had both seen enough of the war to know that words often failed in the face of such loss. "Ethan," Mira said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of concern in it. "You've been pushing yourself too hard. You need to rest." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He shifted his position, leaning back against the cot, eyes closed, as if trying to block out the world around him. He had heard those words before, countless times. Everyone told him to rest, to recover, but he couldn't afford to. There was too much at stake. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice rough. "I've been through worse." Mira didn't push him further. Instead, she simply sat there, waiting. Ethan knew she wouldn't leave until he gave in, until he acknowledged the toll the war had taken on him. He had been running from it for so long, but Mira wasn't going to let him run anymore.
"You can't keep going like this,"
she said gently, her voice holding a quiet strength that only added to the comfort of her presence.
"You need to heal."
Physically, yes, but also mentally. He opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling once more. He could feel the tension building in his chest, the familiar weight of the world bearing down on him. He had always thought that as long as he kept fighting, as long as he kept moving, the pain would eventually fade, but it hadn't. It had only grown stronger. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to rest when I know what's coming." Mira didn't respond right away. She understood. She knew that Ethan was a soldier through and through, and the idea of stopping, of letting his guard down, was terrifying to him. Soldiers like him didn't rest. They didn't stop until the battle was won. Or lost. But that kind of thinking had its consequences. "I know it's hard," Mira said softly. "But you don't have to fight this alone." "You have us, Ethan. The resistance." "Me? You're not a machine." "You can't keep going without a break." Ethan's gaze shifted to her, and for the first time in a long while he felt something other than anger, fear, and exhaustion. He felt human. He had spent so many years pretending to be something else. Pretending that the scars didn't bother him. Pretending that the weight of his choices didn't weigh him down. But Mira saw him for who he really was, and she wasn't afraid of it. "I am not sure I know how to be anything else," he said quietly. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the vulnerability he had kept hidden for so long. Mary smiled, a small, warm smile that reached her eyes.
"You're not just a soldier, Ethan. You're a person."
"You're allowed to feel everything you're feeling. You're allowed to rest." He looked down at his hands, the rough palms that had held weapons for so long, the fingers that had pressed against buttons to launch missiles to end lives. Those hands had saved lives too, but it didn't feel like it mattered. All he could see were the scars, the marks of the man he had become, the soldier he had turned into.
"You've done more than enough," Mira said, as if reading his mind.
"Your scars aren't just reminders of pain. They're victories. Each one tells a story of how you fought and survived. You should be proud of them." Ethan looked up at her again, her words sinking deep into his mind. He had never thought of his scars as victories. They had always been a symbol of loss, of things he couldn't change. But Mira, she saw them differently. She saw them as a testament to his strength. Maybe, just maybe, there was something to her words. As the days passed, Ethan found himself thinking about Mira's words more and more. He had spent so much time buried in the fight, in the war, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be human. But now, with her by his side, he was beginning to understand. His scars were not his shame. They were proof of his survival. Proof that he had made it through the worst of it. Ethan knew that the war wasn't over. The Silurith were still a threat, and the human resistance still had a long way to go. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone in it. And maybe, just maybe, that made all the difference. The days were growing shorter, the air colder. The resistance had been preparing for the final strike against the Silurith for weeks. Ethan Cross had spent countless hours reviewing battle plans, strategizing and training the remaining soldiers. Yet, despite the growing anticipation, a feeling of unease gnawed at him. The final battle was close, but he knew that even if they succeeded, it would come at a great cost. The Silurith had built a weapon capable of ending the human race in a single blow. The Resistance had tracked it to their main base, a heavily fortified structure hidden beneath the ruins of what used to be one of Earth's most vibrant cities. The weapon was their last chance at winning, but it would not be easy to destroy. The Silurith were waiting for them, prepared to make sure that humanity would never again rise up against their alien invaders. Ethan had been chosen to lead the mission. It was an honor, of course, but also a burden. He knew what was at stake, knew that this mission could very well be his last. His body was already broken from years of fighting. His scars, once symbols of survival, now felt like reminders of the toll this war had taken. He had survived countless battles, but this would be different. This time, it was all or nothing. Mira Vance had been by his side through it all. She had treated his wounds, shared in his victories, and witnessed his defeats. But this mission was different. This time, he would need to make a choice that could cost him everything. The weight of it pressed down on him, making it difficult to breathe at times. How many more lives could he sacrifice before it was enough? How much more could his heart take? One evening, as the Resistance prepared for their final push, Ethan found himself alone in the command room, staring at the map of the Silurith base. His mind wandered, lost in thought. He could still see the faces of his fallen comrades, their smiles, their laughter. He remembered their hopes, their dreams, and the way they fought for something they believed in. But none of them had made it. They were all gone, wiped out by the Silurith, victims of the war that had taken so much from them. He thought of Mira, who had stayed by his side through all of it. She had become his anchor in a world that felt like it was constantly shifting beneath him. He didn't know what he would do without her. She had always been there to remind him that he wasn't alone, that there was still something worth fighting for. But even she couldn't stop the reality that loomed over them. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to find Mira standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "You've been in here for hours," she said, stepping inside. "Are you ready?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for her to sit beside him. She hesitated for only a moment before joining him, sitting quietly by his side. "I don't know if I am," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've fought in so many battles, Mira. I've lost so many people. But this feels different. I can't help but wonder if we'll ever be able to truly win. Or if we're just delaying the inevitable." Mira didn't speak at first. She simply placed a hand on his arm, her touch a quiet reminder of the bond they shared. She had seen the toll the war had taken on him, had watched as he became more and more withdrawn with each passing day. But she had never given up on him. She couldn't. Not now. "You're not alone in this," she said softly, her voice steady. "You never have been. You've carried the weight of this war for so long, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore. We're in this together, Ethan, and no matter what happens, we'll face it side by side."
Ethan turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and pain.
He had always prided himself on being a soldier, someone who could fight through anything. But now, in the quiet of the command room, surrounded by maps and weapons, he realized how much he had come to rely on Mira. She was more than just a medic, more than just a fellow soldier. She was his strength when he had none left. She was the light that pierced the darkness. "I'm afraid," he admitted quietly. "Afraid that this will be the end. Afraid that I won't come back."
And if I don't, what happens to everyone else?
Mira's hand tightened on his arm, and she met his gaze with a look of unwavering confidence. "You've always come back, Ethan."
"You've survived more than anyone else. But even if you don't, your fight won't be forgotten. You've given everything for this cause, for this world. That's more than anyone could ever ask of you."
Ethan shook his head, his mind still clouded with doubt.
He had always known that there was a price to pay for victory. But now, as the moment drew nearer, the cost felt too high. How could he ask his soldiers to give everything when he wasn't sure he could do the same? "I don't know if I can do this," he muttered. Mira smiled, her expression soft but firm.
"You already have, Ethan. You've already done the impossible."
"You've survived the worst of it, and now you're here, ready to face whatever comes next. That's who you are." For the first time in days, Ethan felt a sense of clarity. Mira's words, her unwavering belief in him, cut through the fog of doubt that had clouded his mind. She was right. He had survived, and he would continue to survive, because he had to. The fight wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who depended on him. Everyone who had fought and died for this moment. He stood up, his posture straightening as he turned back to the map. The mission was clear. They had to stop the Sillarith, and they had to do it now. But as he looked at the base, his mind flashed to the faces of his fallen comrades. They had all believed in something greater than themselves. They had believed in a future, and that was something worth fighting for. "We'll win this," Ethan said, his voice steady now. "But I can't do it alone. We'll do it together, all of us." Mira stood with him, her eyes filled with quiet strength. "Together!" As they left the command room, Ethan felt something stir inside him. A renewed sense of purpose. The mission was dangerous, yes. But he had never backed down from danger. He had always fought, always pushed forward, even when the odds seemed impossible. And now, with Mira by his side, he was ready to do it again. The night before the final assault, Ethan lay in his cot, staring up at the ceiling. The weight of the mission hung over him like a storm cloud. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel completely alone. Mira's words echoed in his mind, and he realized that she was right. He wasn't alone. And together, they would face whatever came next. The cost of victory would be high. There would be sacrifices. There would be losses. But Ethan knew one thing for sure. He was ready to fight. Because even in the face of uncertainty, even with the scars of his past weighing on him, he still believed in the possibility of a future. And that belief was worth everything. The day of the final assault arrived like a storm. Silent, inevitable, and filled with the tension of what was to come. The Resistance had spent weeks preparing for this moment, pouring everything they had into a mission that could either save humanity or end it once and for all. The Sillarith weapon, the ultimate force meant to destroy Earth, had to be stopped. If it wasn't, the last hope for humanity would be lost. Ethan Cross stood at the front of the command center, surrounded by maps, data streams, and soldiers, each preparing for the final mission. His face was hard, focused, but inside the weight of everything he had been through, and everything still to come, pressed heavily on him. It had been years since he first picked up a weapon, since the world had started to fall apart. He had seen so much destruction, so many lives lost. But this time, the stakes felt different. This time, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for a future. He could feel Mira's presence beside him, her calm energy, a quiet anger. Her belief in him had never wavered, even when he had doubted himself. It was a quiet strength she carried, one that had seen them both through battles far worse than they had imagined. She was the reason he was standing here today. She had shown him that his scars weren't a mark of failure but a badge of survival, a reminder of how far humanity had come, even when it seemed like everything was lost. "Are you ready?" Mira asked, her voice soft, but there was an edge to it. Determination. She knew as well as he did that there was no turning back. The time had come. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning the faces of the soldiers around him. Each one was preparing for what could be their last mission. He had fought beside many of them before. Some of them had become close friends, others mere acquaintances. But they were all bound by a common cause, to save Earth and the people they loved. No matter what happened, they were in this together. "We do this for everyone we've lost," Ethan said, his voice steady and firm. "And for those who will come after us." The soldiers around him nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. They had all lost something, someone, along the way. But they had never lost hope, and that hope was what had brought them to this moment. The Solarith would be stopped. They had no choice but to believe it. The team began to move out, heading toward their transports. The mission was simple in theory, but difficult in practice. Infiltrate the Solarith base, destroy their weapon, and leave before the Solarith could retaliate. But there was nothing simple about it. The Solarith were waiting for them. They knew humanity was coming, and they had set a trap. The ride to the Solarith base was quiet, filled only with the hum of the transport ships and the occasional murmurs of the soldiers. Ethan's mind was focused. He had planned every move, every step. But as the base came into view, even the most carefully laid plans began to feel small in the face of what they were about to do. The base was enormous, its dark silhouette a reminder of the Solarith's power. The walls were reinforced, and the air was thick with the buzz of alien technology. Ethan glanced over at Mira, who was seated across from him. She met his gaze, and in that brief moment, he saw the same mixture of fear and determination that he felt inside. They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't know what awaited them on the other side, but they had each other, and for that, they were stronger than they had been before. As they touched down on the outskirts of the Solarith base, the team quickly disembarked. The Resistance had a small window to get in and destroy the weapon before the Solarith could launch a counterattack. The soldiers moved with precision, the quiet clicking of their boots the only sound in the otherwise still air. Ethan took the lead, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. He wasn't sure if it was the weight of his past battles or the uncertainty of what lay ahead, but every step felt heavy. "Stay sharp," he whispered, glancing back at Mira as she followed close behind. "We're not alone out here." They moved through the shadows, their mission clear: breach the Solarith base, reach the weapon, and destroy it. But as they neared the entrance, the trap was sprung. A sudden blast echoed through the air, and the soldiers scattered, diving for cover. The Solarith were waiting. The battle had already begun. Ethan's heart raced as the first wave of Solarith soldiers appeared. They were fast, agile, and relentless. But Ethan had seen worse. He had fought through countless battles, faced enemies more powerful than the Solarith. He knew how to survive. And now, more than ever, he needed to survive for those around him. "Get to cover!" Ethan shouted to his team as they fired back at the approaching aliens. The sound of weapons firing, explosions, and alien shrieks filled the air. But Ethan focused on one thing: the mission. They had to reach the weapon. He pushed forward, leading the team into the heart of the Solarith base. The path was treacherous, filled with traps and ambushes. But they fought their way through, each step a battle. Mira was close behind him, her presence a constant reminder of the strength they shared. She was always there when he needed her, always steady, always strong. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the heart of the base. the chamber where the Silurith weapon was housed. Ethan felt a rush of relief, but it was short-lived. The room was heavily guarded, and the Silurith had prepared for them. They were waiting. Ethan knew what had to be done. The weapon needed to be destroyed, no matter the cost. He turned to Mira, who was already preparing to make her move. Their eyes met, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. They both knew what was at stake. "Stay with me," Ethan said, his voice low and steady. Mira gave him a nod, her eyes reflecting the same resolve. She would stay. They would finish this together. The final battle was chaos. Ethan fought with everything he had, his body pushed to its limits as he fought off wave after wave of Silurith soldiers. His gun fired non-stop, his movements a blur of practiced skill and instinct. Every fiber of his being was focused on the weapon, on the mission. He didn't have time to think, only to act. But even in the heat of battle, his mind kept returning to Mira. She was there beside him, fighting just as fiercely. He could feel her presence even in the most dangerous moments, a constant, reassuring force. He knew they couldn't fail. Not now. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they reached the core of the weapon. It was massive, a dark, alien structure pulsating with energy. Ethan knew that they had to destroy it before it activated. He turned to Mira, his voice urgent. "We have to overload the core. It'll destroy the weapon, but it's going to be dangerous." Mira didn't hesitate. She moved to the control panel, her hands flying over the keys as she worked quickly to set the overload sequence. The countdown began, and the base started to shake. The Silurith would stop at nothing to prevent them from completing the mission, and the final assault came in waves. But Ethan held his ground, every instinct telling him to fight harder. The countdown reached its final seconds. Ethan could feel the energy building in the air, the weapon's power surging. It was now or never.
Get out! Mira shouted as she finished the sequence.
Ethan grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the exit. They had done it. The weapon was destroyed. But they weren't out of danger yet. The base was crumbling, the Silurith forces closing in. Ethan and Mira ran as fast as they could, pushing through the wreckage and the smoke. The countdown had already begun to take effect, but the pressure was unbearable. As they neared the exit, the base exploded behind them, the force of it sending them flying forward. They landed hard on the ground, but Ethan quickly scrambled to his feet. Mira was right beside him, her face covered in dust and grime, but her eyes still full of determination. The battle was over. The weapon was destroyed. Humanity had won. Ethan turned to Mira, his heart racing. But in that moment, all he could feel was relief. They had done it. Together. "You did it!" Mira said, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan smiled, his scar still aching, his body still broken. But in that moment, he knew something had changed. The scars were no longer just reminders of pain. They were victories, and they had won.